Today I'm going to be making tomato cages for the garden. I had so many tomato plants, I ended up being 5 cages short. So my tomato plants I tried staking them up, but still my tomato plants are basically getting down on the ground. You don't want your tomato plants really touching the ground. So I'm going to be making tomato cages out of concrete reinforcement wire. So this wire is 5 feet tall. It's got 6-inch square openings in it, so it's plenty big enough to be able to reach through it and to be able to pull out a tomato. So this here is a hoop, like a cage that I made to go around one of my fruit trees when it was younger, just to help kind of keep the deer away from it. So I don't need this anymore, this cage, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this down into a couple tomato cages. And then I've got a partial roll of reinforcement wire here, and so we'll roll this out and make the rest of our cages out of this. The only tools I'll be using today is I've got a pair of bolt cutters, and then I've got a pair of pliers to be able to bend the wire. So we're going to go ahead and lay this out and basically start cutting. So you can see this wire is really springy. It'll come back and get you, so you gotta be careful. You really probably want to have 2 people so that one person can hold the other end. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to start my first row and I'm just going to split it right down the middle. So I want like a little 3-inch piece of wire sticking out so that I can tie the cage together. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to count out 10 full squares. I want 10 complete squares, and I'm going to have 2 half squares on the sides. So we're going to count out 10. So here's my 10th full square. So the next row I'm just going to cut that down in half just like I did this one, so that I've got the wire to tie it together. Okay, we're able to get two pieces out of that old cage for the tree. So what we got here is we basically have 10 full rows, and then we've got the 2 half rows on the end, and then we're just using these wires to tie it together. So now we're just going to kind of basically roll it together and tie it together, but instead of just putting it, if you went and just put it straight together, you'd end up with like a teardrop shape. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to roll it together, and we're going to overlap these 2 first squares. So these 2 first squares here, full squares, will overlap, and then we'll bend the wires around each side to lock it together. So I'm not going to actually end up using the pliers. It's be more difficult that way. It's actually easier just to use your hands. So I'm just got some gloves on, and we're just going to bend these over by hand. So once again, this is way easier if there is 2 people. So what we're going to try to do is I'm going to try to reach through here. I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to try to pull that up to the back side of this first square. And then I'm just going to bend that wire over. So some of them I cut a little short. If I can't bend them by hand, I'll come back with some pliers and then bend them. Okay, so at least one of these I want to actually cross over and bend it and wrap around the other side, just to keep this from being able to slide one direction. So let's bend this one, we'll crisscross that one through, and now that'll all stay together the same way. In fact, I'll probably do 2 of them. Do this one as well. There's no room to bend this next to that wire, so I kind of actually angle it into the pocket here, and then once I get it in there, then I can grab it and pull it around. And this is really rough on your thumbs. because this is actually very stout wire. Now this one right here on the bottom, I'm not even going to worry about that, and we'll get to that here in a second. So we're going to just go ahead and bend this down to meet it. Actually, it helps to just kind of bend the whole cage down. And then we'll do the same thing. We're just going to bend these over. I've tried making these before where you just put them next to each other and use tie wire, but a lot of that tie wire's so thin it breaks easy, it rusts through pretty easy, and the wire that's on the cage is just waste outer, so I think this will last a lot longer using its own wire to tie it together. Alright, so we got our cage. It's wrapped around both sides there. Oops, I missed one. Okay, it's probably fairly round. So on the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to take our bolt cutters and we're going to cut off this bottom wire, this bottom circle, and then we're going to have a bunch of 6-inch long wires that are sticking out, and that's how we're basically going to stick it in the ground, is these are going to be our legs that stick in the ground. So we'll just go ahead, put my foot on it here. Like I said, the stuff can spring back at you. Probably wearing shorts is not the best idea, but I like to try to stay cool. We got our tomato cage built. We've just got the little 6-inch long legs here on the end, and that's just what's going to poke into the ground and hold the cage in the ground. Now as your tomato grows up, it's going to want to probably lean this cage one way or the other. If that happens, we'll just pound a T-post in the ground and we'll zip tie that to the side, and that'll hold this in place. But these will work out pretty good. They'll last a pretty long time. My dad always used these cages out of reinforcement wire in his garden, and they aren't galvanized, so these little legs here, they will eventually rust off after a few years. And then all you do is you just cut off the next row right there, and then you've got 6 more legs. So then, you know, after 15 years of using them, my dad's cages were like from this tall to like this tall. So they, you know, they shorten over time, but you can get quite a few years of use out of them. So I just got a couple more to make, and then we'll go ahead and put them in the garden. Well, I got all the tomato cages made up. They're all complete, and I'm ready to go put them in the garden. After 5 cages, even wearing gloves, my hands are pretty sore, so you definitely want to wear gloves, and you probably don't want to try to make a bunch of these in one day. So go ahead, head out to the garden and see if we can get these over our tomato plants. So here's one of the tomato cages that I had made last year, and you can see that the wire legs just poke right through this fabric weed barrier, no problem, and it is holding up the tomato plant fine. Don't have to have a T-post on it. If it does get some more weight, you know, I can always add that later. But if you look over here, some of these tomato plants are pretty good amount of plant in the cage, and they're still just standing up just fine. So these are the tomato plants that aren't inside of cages. I did get 3 of these plants tied to stakes, some wooden stakes, but I ran out of them, and I've got a couple tomato plants over here that are just laying on the ground. So these will be a lot more difficult to get in the cages. We'll just have to see how it goes. And these, I'm just going to leave these tied to the wooden stakes and just slide the cages over them, and I shouldn't have too much of a problem with these. So the tomato cages that you buy in the store, they only have like 3 or 4 legs, and they're a lot longer. But these, I mean, these are a lot shorter, but there's 11 legs that stick in the ground on these. So I think that's one reason why it stays up so well, is just because there's so many poking in the ground. So I'm just going to kind of wiggle this cage around till it pokes holes in the fabric, and then I'm just going to push it into the ground. And since these aren't galvanized, you definitely want to pull them out in the wintertime. You do not want to leave these in the ground, or they will rust off quicker. Well, I got all my tomato cages on, and just in time because it is starting to rain. So I got to pack up and go find an inside job. Thanks for watching.